Hello YouTube, message in a bottle with another video. This time I want to discuss about this video game once again, Black Pill Me, about democracy. And yeah, I already made a video about this video game. I'll leave the link down in the description below because this video game is very well made. What I love about this video game is that it's essentially a post-apocalypse. It's basically after the world essentially ended and the entire planet went on an ice age, and the remnants of humanity, which is from Britain Empire, they try their best to survive this new world. And when they're surviving and thriving, this game is essentially a city building game with a little element of survival, but at the same time with an element of democracy. And in this game, it's super hard to maintain everybody happy because in a democracy you have a bunch of faction popping out with different ideas or different opinions how society should be run. And well, all I gotta say is that this is a very well made game. And what I love about the theme of this game is that every faction, they have good ideas, but sometimes their ideas could be a little too radicalized. In other words, they kind of get a little carried away. So in the end, they kind of make themselves look like the bad guy, and this is something I love about this game. That every faction, they're essentially morally gray. They're not black or white. There's no right or wrong or good versus evil. Everybody is essentially morally gray, and everyone, they have different opinions, and sometimes their opinions are good, but they're not perfect. And that's something I love about this game. And the reason why I'm showing you this picture, Order versus Faith, is because in the first game, Frostpunk 1, you only have two options between factions. And in Frostpunk 1, it was purely about survival. And you could still, make society the way you see fit. But the only options in terms of what type of faction you want in your society is Order and Faith. Now, me personally, as a Christian, I'm kind of biased towards faith, but eventually I tried the order, and little did I realize the order was kind of canon in Frostpunk series, and this was heavily implied in the spin-off content of Frostpunk. I forgot the name of the spin-off content, but it was heavily implied that the captain, he from Frostpunk 1, he went to the order side. In other words, the order was essentially was like the default in the story. And yeah, so the order was essentially the default canon of the Frostpunk series. And from there, Frostpunk 2, it was essentially like a carry on from what happened from the first game. The only difference is in Frostpunk 2, you have multiple factions popping out, and this time the game focused more on democracy. In Frostpunk 1, there was no democracy, and you only had two different factions between the Order and the Faith, but that was like the player's choice. But there was no other faction existed in that game, and it was more about survival and maintaining the city, like keeping the city surviving through the harsh ice age. In Frostpunk 2, it's technically the same thing, but they expanded more on the factions and how society should be running. And of course, it was democratic. So you have like a democracy where everyone gets to vote and everyone gets to uh, shout their ideas. But one thing that this game kind of blackpilled me, and I sort of realized this, despite that, me personally, I'm a little biased towards Christianity, and I want to see Christian to grow as a religion, and you know, the church being something important in the community of everybody. This game sort of blackpilled me in terms of what's important in our society, and I'll show you the faction that got stuck in my mind. The Stewards. The Stewards, they're essentially Frostpunk 2 version of the Order from the first game, Frostpunk 1. Now, you could still pick between the Faith Keepers and the Stewards, but as I stated, the Stewards, or should I say the Order, they're essentially the default canon version of the Frostpunk story, as it was heavily implied in the spin off series. And I kind of ask myself, I wonder why. What makes the Stewards like the canon and the ideals? Maybe the game developers, they were onto something, since they made a very well game. Like, this game is incredibly well made. So I play as the Stewards in their version, and something hit me about the Stewards, and it's their motto right here: order is survival. Now, in a post apocalyptic world where people are trying to build a city and try to survive in a harsh environment, it makes perfect sense that if you're trying to make a city, trying to make society, and you're trying to keep it like surviving it for a very long time, you have to have order. And in my opinion, this is more important than the faith keepers, religion's ideas. Don't get me wrong, religious is important, but order is something that you absolutely need to have in order to maintain a society. And for those of you who watch my YouTube videos, you know that I've been rambling about dating. You know, I've been rambling about politics, what's wrong with our society. And one thing I've been noticing, and I'm gonna show a screenshot right here, is China is becoming a global superpower. And this is no secret, by the way. This has been on the news for a very long time that China is rising, China is taking over, China is becoming more and more dominant, and eventually it's going to become even more dominant than the US. And the reason why I'm bringing up China is because this is kind of the equivalent of what I shouldn't compare it to something in real life with a video game, but as I stated throughout my YouTube channel, that sometimes when you watch stuff or play video games in the media, they tend to reflect something in real life. Like, once again, art is a reflection of our reality. And this video game, Frostpunk 2, aside from giving me the black pill of democracy, because democracy, it only works when people could respect each other's opinion. But the moment when people loses that respect is the moment when democracy dies, because democracy is a pla essentially a system where people get to have different opinions, but you still could express them. And right now we're slowly losing our democracy, and the biggest problem with democracy is that you will have factions that want to stay in power. If you guys remember what I said in my last video of me featuring Frostpunk 2, is that in Europe right now there's a lot of left-wing parties that are trying to stay in power, and they're trying to shut off any quote-unquote right-winger parties. Even though they're not really right-wingers, they're just a little anti-immigration. They're trying to shut them down and prevent them from having any seat of power in their democracy, quote-unquote. And in Mexico, the PRI, they've been in position of power for a very long time, and that's kind of suspicious, by the way, that they've been position of power for too long. And here in America, we have a two-party dictatorship. It's almost impossible for another faction or another party to get in a position of power. So Frostpunk 2, it kind of reflects in that, where sorry guys, different factions, they want to stay in power, and in the game it's super difficult to please everybody, and some factions, they go radicalized and they get berserk, and they want to have control over the city and society, and they want to rule how they see fit. In China, they don't have that problem because it's never been a democracy in the first place. But China has something in common with the stewards in Frostpunk 2, and that is that their obsession with order. And order is something that China is very good at. Now, technically, the East Asian countries, they're atheist, but they do have a little spirituality in them. Like, that's why they have temples, and that's why they have Buddhist monks. And Buddhism is a thing, by the way. They have Taoism, so they do have spirituality in a sense, but overall, they're still technically an atheist country. And the reason why China is one of the oldest civilizations that survived for a very long time is because they had an obsession of harmony and order, keeping things in order. And that's why when you watch YouTube videos showcasing about China and their prosperity, you will notice something in common about China is how orderly they are. And it's not just China, it's also South Korea and Japan. South Korea and Japan, many of their society, many of their places is very clean and very order structure like. Here in America and Western countries, we're slowly degrading into chaos and we're losing that order. And this reflects back to what the stewards in Frostpunk 2 is all about. Order is survival. And China is slowly becoming, best way I can put it, the worst enemy of liberals' nightmare without even realizing it. And the reason why I say that is because the Western liberals, they have this weird obsession of hating Nazi and calling out fascism, but China is technically a fascism, and China's becoming something similar to the Nazis, but the difference is it has a twist of East Asian culture and identity. And the reason why I'm saying this, guys, is because China, they're not they're not hiding anything about it. They're very unapologetic of what they believe, and they believe that Han Chinese is superior to every other East Asians, and they're very biased. They want Han Chinese to be dominant, and they want Han Chinese to be a very special class in their society. They're very nationalist, and they look down upon Africans, which, by the way, once again, they're unapologetic about it. If you watch some censorship, like compared to Western movies, they literally censor some stuff just to please the Chinese people. And the movie studios, they literally bend the knee on this. They straight up bend the knee because they don't, because China, they don't care, and they have power, by the way. They have power. So I remember the movie Black Panther when it came out, they had to censor the art, the commercial art for the movie Black Panther to please the Chinese. And once again, that's because the Chinese, they look down upon Africans. But here in the Western country, they sort of shove it in our face for some reason. Like, they'll do anything to basically please Africans in Western countries, especially in Britain for some reason. But in China, oh no, the studios, they will never bend the knee on this. And what's kind of scary and sad, and a lot of Western countries, they're sort of turning a blind eye on this, is that China, they have no respect on democracy, and for a very good reason. They view democracy as something as disorder and something that it's going to cause chaos, and the people of that country, they will not survive in the long run. Meanwhile, China, they have this narrative that it's important to maintain order and harmony because China, as a civilization, survived over 3,000 years. And essentially, they gave up on the ideals of communism, and now they're more into the reason and more into, best way I can put it, an ethno state for survival. China is very unapologetic, and this video, what Kruat made of China, Trump's biggest failure, was trying to, what in this video, what he's trying to say is that China essentially banned the ideals of communism more in favor into making the state of China into a superpower and global dominance to relive the glory days of what once had. And this video is a very good video. You guys should watch it. But the new Chinese government in the communist, you know, party of China, they understand that order above everything else is important. And this reflects to what the stewards from Frostpunk 2 was saying: order is survival. And China, right now, they all about harmony, they're all about order. And they understand that some ideology from Western countries, they're causing chaos. And they're actually implementing this in their schools to showcase how democracy is a sham, to showcase how democracy is disorder. And yeah, there's China is like onto something. And what's funny is that China is becoming a fascism structure like country, because again, it's no longer a communist country. So they abandoned the ideals of communism. But what's funny is that liberals from Western countries, they're outright ignoring this, and yet they hate Nazism. But China's becoming like the East Asia version of Nazi, with just a twist of communism. But anyway, it's kind of funny what we're seeing, and I think I know why liberals are ignoring China. Is because China is a non-white country. If China was a white country, then yeah, they'll call it out as it was. But no, China is a East Asian country, and they're onto something. But yeah, and the reason why I'm making this video, guys, is because I'm starting to understand what China is trying to say. Well, not trying to say, more like what they're trying to do, because they understand their history and they understand what's important. What's important is the country's itself survival. Once again, China is a 3,000-year-old civilization. It survived so long because the narrative of harmony and order, social order, is what needs to happen in order for that civilization to survive. And right now, China sees the Western countries unable to maintain order and harmony, and they could see it in the long run that Western civilization is not going to survive what's coming. Well, guys, I'm going to end the video here, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. Message in the bottle, over and out.